Welcome to the world of genius at work. Tonight, we're going to slow down and settle in as we explore the remarkable life of Leonardo da Vinci. Find a comfortable spot. Perhaps tuck yourself into your favorite chair or pull the covers up a little tighter. Let your shoulders relax and take a deep, easy breath. Just allow yourself to be present, right here, right now, wherever you are. Now, where are you tuning in from, and what time is it? Is it evening or morning in your perfectly chaotic schedule? No need to share, of course, just a quiet thought as you drift along. If you're enjoying these journeys, consider subscribing so you don't miss a single one. And as we prepare to step back in time, picture a land bathed in the golden light of an era about to bloom. Imagine the energy, the buzzing curiosity, the very air alive with new ideas. This is the Renaissance, and it's about to burst into vibrant life. The dust, fine and pale, rose from the worn earth of Vinci as a young boy, his eyes wide with wonder, traced the veins of a fallen leaf. He pressed the rough bark of an olive tree, feeling the deep furrows beneath his fingertips, as if trying to understand the very secrets the ancient wood held within its core. The sharp cries of swallows darting through the brilliant blue sky above him filled his ears, a constant reminder of the effortless grace of flight he so longed to grasp, for he saw in their every movement a mechanical precision waiting to be deciphered. The air, carrying the dry scent of sun-baked earth and distant wild herbs, felt warm against his skin, and he often paused, his small frame stilling, to simply watch and absorb the intricate workings of the world around him. One crisp morning, a different scent reached him, sharp and clean, like sap and something metallic. It was the smell that clung to the bustling workshop in Florence, a place of constant motion and the ringing clang of hammers. He stepped into this new world, a place where apprentices worked shoulder to shoulder, their brows furrowed in concentration. The very air seemed alive with the quick scratch of charcoal on parchment and the steady rasp of wood being shaped. He found himself navigating a cramped space, shared with others who all seemed to possess a confidence that felt alien to him, each skilled hand moving with a purpose he was still learning to divine. The elder apprentices, their faces smudged with charcoal and paint, often spoke in hushed tones, their words a flurry of names and veiled criticisms. There was a palpable undercurrent of rivalry here, a silent competition for the master's favor and the chance to work on the most important commissions. He learned quickly that the placement of a single brushstroke, the subtle curve of a sculpted limb, could be the subject of intense scrutiny and hushed debate amongst them. He observed how a master's glance could ignite pride or cast a shadow, how a compliment was a rare, precious thing, and how even the smallest mistake could draw a sharp reprimand, fueling a fierce desire in him to prove his own worth. He recalled a moment when a particularly bold assertion from another apprentice about the proper way to render a horse's mane, its thick strands cascading with life, had led to a heated exchange. The older boy, his face flushed, insisted on a technique that felt stiff and unnatural to the watching boy, who had spent hours sketching the wilder, more dynamic shapes of horses he'd seen in nearby fields. He found himself wrestling with the urge to speak, to offer a different perspective, yet the unspoken rules of this shared environment, where deference to those ahead was expected, held him back. He wondered if his own way of seeing, so deeply ingrained from the quiet observations of his youth, would ever find a place amidst these established methods. As he mixed pigments, the vibrant blues and earthy reds staining his fingers, he felt the constant pressure to absorb every detail, every technique. The master, Andrea del Verrocchio, a man whose skill was spoken of with reverence throughout the city, moved with an assured grace among his tools and apprentices. Verrocchio's hands, strong and calloused, could coax life from stone or metal with equal ease,
and the younger boy found himself watching, utterly mesmerized, as he guided a chisel with practiced precision. The master's pronouncements were often brief, yet they carried immense weight, shaping the direction of their work and the young minds eager to learn from him. One afternoon, while meticulously sketching the delicate wings of a dragonfly he'd captured, the sharp scent of linseed oil filled the air. Another apprentice, a boy named Niccolo, whose ambition seemed to burn brighter than his talent, sauntered over, a smug look on his face. He glanced at the drawing with a dismissive air, his words laced with a subtle mockery. "Still looking at bugs, Leonardo?" Niccolo scoffed, gesturing with his chin towards a half-finished Madonna that lay on a nearby easel. "The master needs us to paint saints, not insects, if we're ever to get noticed." This remark, sharp as a sliver of glass, stung the boy. He knew Niccolo was eager to impress, to secure a place among the favored few, and his attempts to belittle others were a common tactic. Yet he also knew that understanding the intricate mechanics of that dragonfly's wing, the very way it caught and reflected the light, felt just as vital as capturing the serene expression of a painted saint. He considered arguing, explaining that the natural world held its own divine order, but the sound of the master's voice calling for a specific tool cut his thought short, and he simply nodded, his gaze returning to the fragile creature. The young Leonardo found himself drawn to the raw, untamed beauty of the Tuscan hills surrounding his home. He would spend hours observing the effortless way a hawk banked and turned in the sky, its wings spread wide, catching unseen currents. The rough texture of the rock faces, sculpted by wind and rain over countless seasons, held a fascination for him, each crevice and contour a testament to patient, persistent forces. He often felt a kinship with these natural formations, understanding their silent strength and enduring presence. He even remembers the satisfying weight of a smooth river stone in his hand, its cool surface a comforting contrast to the rough, sun-warmed earth he walked upon. His journey to Verrocchio's workshop in Florence marked a significant shift, plunging him into a world of constant creative bustle. The sharp, clean scent of turpentine mixed with the earthy aroma of pigments and the metallic tang of metalworking. The rhythmic clang of hammers on metal and the rasp of chisels against marble created a constant symphony of creation. He witnessed firsthand the intense focus of the other apprentices, their hands stained with a rainbow of colors, and their brows often beaded with sweat from their arduous tasks, all working under the watchful eye of the master. Within the crowded workshop, a subtle but persistent rivalry simmered. Each apprentice vied for the master's attention, for the opportunity to contribute to the grander works that would solidify their reputations. He saw how the master's approval was a coveted prize, and how a well-executed detail, a perfectly rendered fold of cloth, or a lifelike expression could earn a nod of recognition. This environment fostered a keen awareness of his own developing skills, the constant need to refine his technique and observe every subtle nuance in the work of those around him. He remembers a specific instance when he was tasked with painting a small portion of an angel's robe in a larger altarpiece. Another apprentice, someone who had been there longer and possessed a more confident hand, had already rendered the drapery with bold, sweeping strokes that certainly caught the eye. However, Leonardo felt a quiet dissatisfaction. The folds, while dramatic, seemed to lack the natural way light would fall upon fabric, the subtle softening and creasing where the material bunched. He found himself wrestling with the impulse to subtly alter the rendering, to soften the edges and introduce a more nuanced play of shadow. But the fear of drawing criticism from his peers and the master kept his brush still. The older apprentices would often share whispers about who was favored for the next important commission. their conversations a mixture of hope and subtle apprehension. He heard them discuss the merits of different patrons, the powerful families and merchants who funded the city's artistic endeavors, and the unspoken expectations that accompanied their gold. He understood that success was not solely about talent, but also about navigating the intricate web of Florentine society, a complex tapestry of connections and influence that extended far beyond the workshop walls, making him wonder about the true path to recognition. During one of his walks through the vibrant Florentine markets, the air filled with the calls of vendors and the sweet scent of ripening fruit, he saw a group of men debating the merits of a newly erected statue in the city square. Their voices, passionate and loud, carried across the bustling space, each man eager to assert his opinion on the artist's skill and the subject's portrayal. He paused, listening intently, realizing that the creation of art was not a solitary pursuit confined to the studio, but a public conversation, a reflection of the city's values and aspirations, and that even the smallest detail of a sculpture could spark such robust disagreement among the populace. He often found himself sketching during any quiet moment, his mind constantly dissecting the world. The way a muscle flexed under the skin, the precise curve of a bird's wing, the very structure of a human hand, these were not mere observations, but puzzles to be solved. He'd capture the fleeting glimpse of a bird in flight on a scrap of parchment, feeling an almost urgent need to record its aerodynamic form before the image faded from his mind's eye. He remembered the smooth, cool feel of the vellum he used, a welcome contrast to the rougher surfaces he often worked on, and the satisfying sound it made as his charcoal moved across it, laying down lines of discovery. He noticed how the master, Verrocchio, would sometimes pause his own work to examine these drawings, his usual stern expression softening slightly. There was a moment, he recalled, when Verrocchio had looked at a detailed sketch of a flying machine, a contraption of wings and levers he had devised, and simply nodded, a gesture that felt more meaningful than any spoken praise. It was during these brief exchanges, these shared moments of understanding, that he felt a true connection to the artistic spirit of Florence, a sense that his own explorations, however unconventional, were part of a larger unfolding story. The constant need to adapt his techniques, to learn new ways of applying pigments or carving stone, presented its own set of challenges. He recalled the frustration of a particular pigment, a vibrant blue, that refused to dry as he expected, its slow setting time threatening to smudge the carefully rendered details of a celestial robe he was painting. He had to experiment with different binders, the subtle addition of egg yolk or a touch of oil, to achieve the desired consistency and quick drying time, a process that involved careful trials and frequent adjustments. It was through these small, persistent struggles that he truly began to understand the materials he worked with. He remembered overhearing a conversation between two older apprentices one evening, their voices low as they discussed the financial constraints of the workshop. One spoke of a delayed payment from a patron, a wealthy merchant known for his demanding nature, and the worry that this delay cast over their ability to procure the necessary supplies for the month. The other apprentice lamented the cost of good quality pigments, particularly the rare lapis lazuli, which lent itself to the most luminous blues, and how their availability was often dictated by the fluctuating fortunes of those who commissioned their work, highlighting the delicate balance between artistic creation and economic realities. He also observed the distinct styles of the other apprentices, each developing their own individual approach to rendering form and light. One favored bold, dramatic lines, creating figures with a powerful, almost sculptural presence, while another excelled at capturing delicate textures and the subtle play of light on soft fabrics. He recognized that while they all learned from the same master, their personal interpretations and innate talents guided their hands in unique ways, creating a vibrant, diverse tapestry of artistic expression within the workshop, each artist contributing their own unique voice to the Florentine Renaissance. Around the workshop, the familiar sounds of daily life continued their ancient rhythm. Florence pulsed with a vibrant energy, a testament to its burgeoning wealth and influence. As an established artist, Leonardo found himself navigating a more complex world of commissions, a stark contrast to the raw learning of his apprenticeship. He met with men whose wealth was etched into the rich brocade of their tunics and the assuredness in their voices, each commission a negotiation where their desires often tangled with his own meticulous vision. These powerful merchants and members of the influential guilds expected not just artistry, but a swift completion, a pace that sometimes felt at odds with his deep need to understand and perfect each element.
The structure of the Artists' Guild, a place where apprenticeship gave way to recognized mastery, held sway over his practice. Within its hallowed halls, rules dictated methods and practices, and a craftsman's reputation was as carefully guarded as his finest pigments. He often shared conversations with fellow painters in the communal workshops, the sharp scent of linseed oil and turpentine a constant companion, where the pressure to deliver timely pieces for discerning patrons created a quiet tension, a hum beneath the rhythmic tap of chisels and the scratch of charcoal on parchment. The bustling marketplaces and grand public squares of the city served as a constant backdrop to this intricate dance of creation and commerce. Here, art was not confined to private studios, but was woven into the very fabric of Florentine life, displayed for all to see, a source of civic pride and a reflection of the city's growing stature. He observed how religious frescoes adorned church walls, how the facades of newly built palazzi boasted sculpted reliefs, each piece contributing to the visual symphony of the city, and he felt the weight of expectation to add his own distinctive notes to this grand composition. One afternoon, as the sun cast long shadows across the Piazza della Signoria, Leonardo found himself speaking with a fellow guild member, a painter known for his rapid output. "They expect a masterpiece every season, Leonardo," the man sighed, wiping a smudge of ochre from his brow. "These patrons, they see the finished work, not the hours spent wrestling with a shadow or the sleepless nights trying to capture a fleeting expression." He wondered if such relentless demand would forever shape the creation of beauty, or if the true pursuit of knowledge could ever truly be reconciled with the marketplace's relentless hunger. This pressure to produce for immediate gratification often pulled at his own inclinations. While the expectation was to deliver, his mind often wandered, drawing him towards the intricate mechanics of a clockwork device or the precise musculature of a horse he'd observed in the stable. He found himself sketching designs for ingenious water-lifting machines in the margins of a commissioned portrait, the very act of creation for one purpose sparking ideas for countless others, a constant internal push and pull between fulfilling existing obligations and exploring nascent curiosities.
The Guild's decree, while offering a framework for practice, also presented a rigid hierarchy that could stifle innovation. He recalled the careful, almost reverent way his own master, Verrocchio, had guided his hand, teaching not just technique, but the very understanding of form and shadow. Now, as a master himself, he felt the responsibility to impart that same depth of understanding to his own apprentices. Yet he also recognized the need to foster their individual voices, a delicate balance that required patience and keen observation of their burgeoning talents. He found himself contemplating the very nature of artistic reputation within this structured environment.
It was not just the quality of the finished piece, but the timeliness of its delivery and the patron's satisfaction that truly cemented one's standing. He observed how some artists, though perhaps less gifted in the nuances of expression, gained greater favor through their ability to consistently meet deadlines and appease the powerful individuals who commissioned their work. This realization sparked a quiet debate within him. Should artistic integrity bend to practical necessity, or could true mastery forge its own path, eventually commanding its own unique rhythm? The vibrancy of Florence, then, was a complex tapestry, rich with artistic achievement and driven by economic prosperity, yet also bound by the structured expectations of its guilds and the demands of its wealthy patrons. He walked through the lively streets, the scent of baking bread mingling with the distant clang of hammers from metalworkers, all part of the city's pulse. He carried the weight of his commissions, the murmurs of his peers, and the ever-present hum of his own insatiable curiosity, wondering how best to navigate this flourishing world, to add his unique mark without sacrificing the deeper truths he sought. The scent of expensive perfumes and aged parchment lingered in the air as Leonardo considered the intricate dance of his craft, knowing that the demands of Florence, while providing sustenance and opportunity, also presented a constant challenge to the boundless exploration that truly fueled his spirit.
The distant hills of Tuscany, with their terracotta roofs and the scent of drying herbs carried on the breeze, felt a world away. Leonardo, now an established artist in Florence, found himself standing on the precipice of a new allegiance, a significant shift from the familiar rhythms of his apprenticeship. A summons had arrived, a formal request delivered by a stern-faced man in the Duke's livery, beckoning him to Milan. The request was not for a fresco or a painted altarpiece, but for his ingenuity in a far grander, more complex arena, the court of Ludovico Sforza, known as Il Moro. This new environment promised not just artistic patronage, but a stage for his burgeoning interests in mechanics and warfare, a different kind of power and influence than he had known amongst the guilds and merchant families of his city. The journey northwards was a study in contrasts, the familiar Tuscan landscape gradually giving way to the richer, more fertile plains surrounding Milan. As the city loomed, its imposing architecture spoke of ambition and a different kind of authority. Upon arrival, the sheer scale of the ducal court became immediately apparent. It was a labyrinth of opulent halls, echoing with the footsteps of courtiers adorned in velvets and silks, each bearing the subtle insignia of their station and allegiances. Leonardo observed the strict hierarchy, the way deference was paid to those of higher birth and influence, and the almost theatrical displays of power that characterized courtly life. He recognized that his talents as a painter, though valued, were but one facet of what the Duke desired from him. Ludovico Sforza himself was a man of restless energy, his pronouncements often followed by swift, ambitious directives. Leonardo presented himself not merely as a brush-wielding artisan, but as an engineer, a designer of marvels, and a strategist. His mind, accustomed to the meticulous observation of nature, was already sketching in the air, envisioning mechanisms for siege engines and elaborate waterworks, even conjuring designs for fantastical festivals that would showcase the Duke's might and splendor. This direct engagement with the Duke's practical and often military concerns represented a significant departure from the more purely aesthetic demands of his Florentine commissions, requiring a constant adaptation of his thinking and skills.
The conversation with the Duke, held in a study filled with the subtle scent of beeswax and aged paper, solidified Leonardo's new role. Il Moro spoke of a monumental ambition, an equestrian statue, a colossal bronze tribute to his father, Francesco Sforza. The undertaking was immense, a project that would consume years and demand a vast array of skills, from casting techniques to the engineering of structural integrity for a statue of unprecedented size. Leonardo felt a surge of both excitement and apprehension. This was a challenge that would test the very limits of his knowledge and require him to navigate the complex demands of ducal authority, where success meant immense prestige and failure could carry severe consequences. The practicalities of this colossal undertaking quickly became apparent. Leonardo found himself coordinating with metalworkers, clay sculptors, and engineers, each with their own methods and opinions. The sheer volume of bronze required for such a casting was staggering, prompting discussions about sourcing the raw materials and the intricate process of melting and pouring such a massive amount of metal. He observed how the Duke's approval was a constantly shifting landscape, influenced by advisors, rivalries, and the Duke's own mercurial temperament. This necessitated a delicate dance of diplomacy, ensuring his engineering proposals met not only technical requirements, but also the Duke's often grand and sometimes impractical visions. One afternoon, while meticulously sketching the anatomy of a horse for the monumental equestrian project, Leonardo found himself in conversation with a seasoned master sculptor who had worked for years within the Milanese court. The sculptor, his hands thick with calluses and the faint smell of marble dust clinging to him, spoke of the subtle pressures of pleasing patrons, especially one as demanding as Il Moro. "The Duke desires not just a statue," he'd remarked, his voice a low rumble, "but a monument to his own glory. Your designs for the casting, they must be flawless, for any miscalculation here is not merely an artist's error, but a stain upon his legacy." This was a different kind of pressure than Leonardo had faced before, one where artistic vision intersected directly with political power. The Duke's fascination extended beyond military engineering and grand monuments. He also commissioned elaborate court entertainments. Leonardo was tasked with designing automata for a ducal mask, mechanical figures that could move and interact, adding a layer of wonder and spectacle to the festivities. This involved understanding gears, levers, and the principles of motion in a way that transcended painting. He meticulously sketched designs for a mechanical lion that could walk and present lilies, and a troupe of acrobats whose movements were dictated by intricate clockwork. The swiftness with which these creations had to be conceived and built tested his ability to adapt and innovate under pressure, a skill that would become increasingly vital in his career. The workshops buzzed with activity, a symphony of hammers striking metal, saws cutting wood, and the murmur of instructions in various dialects. Leonardo found himself directing teams of artisans, his notebooks filled with precise diagrams and instructions. He discovered that managing these diverse groups, each with their own skills and temperaments, required a new form of leadership. The inherent challenge lay in ensuring that the vision, complex and multifaceted as it was translated accurately into tangible form, a process fraught with potential for misunderstanding and deviation from his designs. This constant negotiation between his detailed plans and the practical execution by others was a subtle test of his authority. As he worked on the colossal clay model for the equestrian statue, a magnificent creature brought to life under his direction, Leonardo was acutely aware of the political currents swirling around the Duke. Whispers reached him of rivals, of factions within the court vying for influence, and of the ever-present threat of war that loomed over the Italian states. He understood that his patron's power, and by extension his own position, was not absolute. The need to maintain the Duke's favor meant not only delivering on artistic and engineering marvels, but also subtly navigating the intricate web of courtly intrigue, a skill he had to learn with the same diligence he applied to his anatomical studies. The Duke, ever eager for novelty, would often summon Leonardo to discuss various projects, his questions ranging from the trajectory of cannonballs to the most effective methods for illuminating the ducal palace. Leonardo found himself frequently needing to explain complex mechanical principles in straightforward terms, a task that honed his ability to communicate his ideas effectively across different disciplines. This constant exchange, this demand for practical application of his knowledge, proved to be a powerful engine for his own intellectual growth, pushing him to refine his understanding and explore new avenues of inquiry even as he fulfilled his duties. The sheer ambition of the equestrian monument, even in its clay form, drew the admiration of many within the court, yet it also invited scrutiny and the inevitable comparisons with other great works. Leonardo observed how certain courtiers, perhaps influenced by his rivals or simply envious of the Duke's patronage, would cast lingering glances at his progress, their expressions unreadable, but their intent, he suspected, to find any flaw. This undercurrent of judgment, this constant awareness that his work was under a microscope, was a subtle form of pressure, a reminder that even the most ambitious projects were vulnerable to the shifting tides of opinion and political favor. He noticed, too, a particular tension amongst the older artisans, men who had dedicated their lives to more traditional crafts and viewed his embrace of complex machinery and his studies of flight with a mixture of awe and skepticism. One older carpenter, his hands gnarled like ancient roots, once muttered, "The master seeks to make man fly? Such a thing is not for us to tamper with." This sentiment, though unspoken by most, represented a cultural adherence to established boundaries, a reluctance to embrace the new and the experimental. Leonardo felt a quiet conviction that such limits were not inherent, but merely perceived, a challenge to be overcome with ingenuity and perseverance.
Despite the demands of the court, Leonardo's mind never ceased its relentless exploration. During the quiet hours, when the clamor of the ducal palace subsided, he would retreat to his private studies, his notebooks filling with observations on the flow of water, the anatomy of birds, and intricate designs for flying machines. He knew that these personal inquiries, though not directly commissioned by the Duke, were the true fuel for his creative engine. The challenge was balancing the immense practical demands of his patron with the insatiable need to understand the world, a delicate equilibrium he constantly sought to maintain, lest one overshadow the other. One evening, while reviewing the detailed plans for the colossal bronze casting with a team of foremen, a sudden downpour began. The sound of rain drumming on the roof echoed the urgency of their task, as the exposed clay model needed protection. The men, accustomed to the unpredictable weather, quickly moved to cover the massive sculpture with thick canvas and wooden frames. Leonardo, standing amidst them, felt a sense of shared purpose, a quiet camaraderie in the face of the elements and the magnitude of their endeavor. He could almost forget the weight of the Duke's expectations in these moments of communal effort. The damp earth beneath the makeshift table clung to the cool air, a familiar sensation after the quick afternoon rain. Leonardo, his fingers stained a deep ochre from the pigments he'd ground, found himself drawn to the intricate network of veins visible on a discarded leaf. Earlier, a sharp argument had echoed through the larger workshop space, a disagreement between two apprentices over the proper way to smooth a marble bust. One, Niccolò, insisted on a finer grit of sandpaper, his voice rising with frustration, while the other, Giovanni, argued for a gentler hand and less abrasive material, his tone measured but firm. Leonardo, observing from his corner, felt a familiar tug between the desire for perfection and the pressure of deadlines, a constant balancing act that often left him wrestling with his own methods long after others had retired for the night. He remembered the stern gaze of Messer Andrea, his master, during those early Florentine days, how easily a misplaced stroke or a hurried application of paint could draw a sharp reprimand.
This pursuit of accuracy, however, felt different, more intimate and profound than simply pleasing a master. He carefully peeled back another layer of the leaf, revealing the delicate branching beneath, and a question formed in his mind. How did this small, intricate system mirror the larger waterways that fed their city? It was this curiosity, this relentless questioning of how things worked, that often pulled him away from the assigned tasks, leading him down paths of inquiry that few others seemed to tread. The recent days in Milan had been a whirlwind of activity, a stark contrast to the focused calm of Florence. The sheer scale of Duke Ludovico's court, with its endless procession of nobles and supplicants, still felt overwhelming at times. Leonardo had been tasked with designing automata for a grand festival, intricate mechanical birds and lions that were meant to delight the court. But his mind kept returning to the fundamental principles of movement and leverage. He found himself sketching gears and counterweights even as he discussed the placement of fabric for the Duke's elaborate costumes. The constant demand for spectacle and the underlying political maneuvering created a peculiar tension, where artistry and engineering were often mere tools to project power and influence. During this time, a deep disquiet had settled over him concerning the prevailing understanding of the human form. The prevailing medical texts, while respected, seemed to Leonardo to be incomplete, like maps of lands that had never truly been explored. He had heard hushed whispers from physicians and apothecaries about the necessity of direct observation, but the methods were often considered unsavory, even sacrilegious. Yet the internal architecture he glimpsed in the flight of a bird, the hidden mechanisms that allowed for such effortless motion, made him believe that a similar hidden complexity must lie within the very bodies of men and women, a complexity that art alone could not fully convey.
This growing conviction led him to seek out discreet opportunities, away from the bustling squares and the watchful eyes of the city's authorities. He found himself drawn to the shadowed quiet of spaces where the deceased were prepared, places that most people avoided with a shudder. With a few trusted, equally curious companions, they began a process of examination, a painstaking effort to understand the underlying structures that animated life. The air in these enclosed spaces, often cool and still, carried the sharp, clean scent of herbs used to preserve and mask the natural decay, a scent that clung to their clothes and hands long after their work was done. Through the dim light filtering from carefully placed lamps, they would meticulously trace the pathways of nerves and the sturdy framework of bones, each discovery a silent refutation of established dogma. Leonardo would sketch with an almost feverish intensity, his charcoal lines capturing the delicate interplay of muscle and sinew, the intricate network that allowed for every gesture, every breath. He often pondered how these internal mechanisms, so hidden from view, dictated the outward expressions he so carefully rendered in paint. This meticulous, often clandestine work felt like stepping into a forbidden library, each dissection unlocking a new volume of knowledge about the world within. The challenges were not merely intellectual, they were deeply practical as well. Securing suitable subjects required careful planning and discretion, and the very act of study could attract unwanted attention. He often found himself torn between the urgent need to document his findings and the potential ramifications of his unconventional methods. While some of his colleagues in the workshop were satisfied with the traditional approaches, Leonardo felt an undeniable pull to explore these deeper truths, a compulsion that sometimes made him feel like an alien amongst his peers. He knew that such explorations, if discovered, could lead to severe censure, perhaps even exile, but the questions burned too brightly to ignore. This internal conflict,
The tension between societal expectations and his own insatiable drive for understanding often manifested in the subtle details of his work. He would spend hours perfecting the curve of a smile on a painted face, trying to capture not just the outward appearance, but the echo of the complex inner life he was beginning to comprehend. He wondered if the patrons who commissioned these portraits truly understood the depth of study that lay behind each seemingly effortless brushstroke, or if they saw only the finished product, the veneer of beauty without the underlying truth. The intellectual climate of Milan offered a strange blend of vibrant artistic production and the subtle constraints of ducal authority. While the Duke encouraged grand artistic endeavors and celebrated innovation in festivals and fortifications, there were unspoken boundaries to inquiry, particularly in matters that touched upon the sacred or the established order. Leonardo found himself constantly negotiating these boundaries, his mind brimming with ideas for canal systems, military machines, and anatomical studies, all while presenting himself as a loyal servant of the court. This juggling act required a keen awareness of the shifting currents of favor and the potential for any misstep to have significant consequences. He often observed the way knowledge was transmitted within the workshop, the apprentices mimicking the master's hand, diligently copying styles and techniques. Yet he recognized that true progress came not just from imitation, but from questioning, from seeking out the underlying principles that governed artistic creation and, indeed, the very fabric of existence. He hoped, in his own quiet way, that his meticulous record-keeping, his detailed sketches and observations would one day offer a clearer picture to those who followed, a more complete understanding of the intricate workings of both the human form and the world around them. The relentless pursuit of this deeper knowledge, however, often led to a perception of him as detached or eccentric by some of his peers. They saw him sketching the wing of a dragonfly with the same intensity he might apply to a religious fresco, or spending hours observing the flow of water in a stream rather than focusing solely on the commissioned altarpiece. He felt the subtle judgments, the murmurs about his peculiar interests, and he wondered if the pursuit of truth would always require a certain isolation. The sheer breadth of his inquiries often meant that projects, both artistic and scientific, remained in a state of perpetual refinement, never quite reaching a point of definitive completion in his own eyes. The memory of a particularly heated discussion with a respected elder physician in Florence still lingered. The elder, a man whose opinions were widely sought, had dismissed Leonardo's burgeoning anatomical sketches as fanciful, even morbid, declaring that the creator's design was not meant to be so rudely unraveled by mortal hands. The elder's conviction, rooted in generations of accepted wisdom, had given Leonardo pause, planting a seed of doubt about the reception of his work. Yet, as he carefully examined the musculature of a bird's wing later that day, tracing the elegant arrangement of tendons, he felt an undeniable surge of conviction that this careful, detailed observation was not an act of disrespect, but a profound form of reverence. He felt a kinship with the quiet dedication of those who labored to transcribe ancient texts, preserving the wisdom of ages past. Yet, his own efforts felt different, not merely a preservation, but an active excavation, a bringing to light of truths that lay hidden from plain sight. The knowledge he sought was not bound in dusty scrolls, but etched into the very sinews of life, waiting to be uncovered by a keen eye and a persistent hand. The sheer volume of his observations, captured in a unique form of mirrored script, represented a lifetime of grappling with these profound questions, a testament to a mind that refused to be confined by convention. This ongoing exploration into the unseen aspects of existence, this meticulous documentation of the human body's internal architecture, had woven itself so completely into his world that the external rhythms of courtly life often seemed secondary to the quiet revelations found within the mortuary's embrace.
The stone walls of the refectory seemed to hold their breath as Leonardo worked. Dust, stirred by the slight movements of his robes, caught the shafts of sunlight piercing the high windows, illuminating the slow, methodical spread of pigments onto the rough plaster. He leaned closer, his brow furrowed in concentration, the familiar sharp scent of linseed oil and turpentine tickling his nostrils. The murmurs of the Dominican friars overseeing the grand project were a constant, quiet reminder of the weighty expectation tied to every stroke. He'd chosen a specific mixture of pigments, a new approach he believed would capture the luminosity of the scene. Yet a whisper of doubt, a familiar companion, questioned its permanence. Would this experimental tempera hold its brilliance? Or would it, like other endeavors, leave him with a masterpiece that slowly faded, a testament to his ceaseless pursuit of perfection? The weight of the moment pressed upon him. Each face, each gesture of the 12 men gathered around the table represented a different facet of human reaction to a singular, earth-shattering announcement. He had spent weeks observing, sketching, trying to distill the essence of betrayal and confusion into the set of a jaw, the widening of an eye. He felt a kinship with the very act of creation, a mirroring of the divine spark that shaped the world. However, capturing that fleeting moment, that precise instant when understanding dawned and the shadows of doubt began to creep in, proved an immense challenge. He often found himself wrestling not just with the paint, but with the very nature of emotion itself, a battle waged on the silent canvas. He stepped back, tilting his head to survey the group, then returned to the central figure, his brush poised. A knot of impatience tightened in his gut when the prior of the monastery entered, his voice a low rumble that broke the quiet focus. "Maestro Leonardo," the prior began, his tone polite yet firm. "The Duke inquires about the progress. He anticipates the unveiling." Leonardo offered a tight nod, his mind already calculating how much time remained before the drying would be too far advanced for further delicate adjustments. He wished he could communicate the intricate dance of light and shadow he was trying to coax from the plaster, the silent dialogue he was having with the figures he brought to life. Explaining this intricate internal process to those who saw only the visible result was a burden he often carried alone. The stone walls of the refectory seemed to hold their breath as Leonardo worked. Dust, stirred by the slight movements of his robes, caught the shafts of sunlight piercing the high windows, illuminating the slow, methodical spread of pigments onto the rough plaster. He leaned closer, his brow furrowed in concentration, the familiar sharp scent of linseed oil and turpentine tickling his nostrils. The murmurs of the Dominican friars overseeing the grand project were a constant, quiet reminder of the weighty expectation tied to every stroke. He'd chosen a specific mixture of pigments, a new approach he believed would capture the luminosity of the scene. Yet a whisper of doubt, a familiar companion, questioned its permanence. Would this experimental tempera hold its brilliance? Or would it, like other endeavors, leave him with a masterpiece that slowly faded, a testament to his ceaseless pursuit of perfection? The weight of the moment pressed upon him. Each face, each gesture of the 12 men gathered around the table represented a different facet of human reaction to a singular, earth-shattering announcement. He had spent weeks observing, sketching, trying to distill the essence of betrayal and confusion into the set of a jaw, the widening of an eye. He felt a kinship with the very act of creation, a mirroring of the divine spark that shaped the world. However, capturing that fleeting moment,
That precise instant when understanding dawned and the shadows of doubt began to creep in proved an immense challenge. He often found himself wrestling not just with the paint, but with the very nature of emotion itself, a battle waged on the silent canvas. He stepped back, tilting his head to survey the group, then returned to the central figure, his brush poised. A knot of impatience tightened in his gut when the prior of the monastery entered, his voice a low rumble that broke the quiet focus. "Maestro Leonardo," the prior began, his tone polite yet firm, "the Duke inquires about the progress. He anticipates the unveiling." Leonardo offered a tight nod, his mind already calculating how much time remained before the drying would be too far advanced for further delicate adjustments. He wished he could communicate the intricate dance of light and shadow he was trying to coax from the plaster, the silent dialogue he was having with the figures he brought to life. Explaining this intricate internal process to those who saw only the visible result was a burden he often carried alone.
He recalled his earlier days in Verrocchio's workshop, the friendly rivalries and shared struggles that seemed so distant now. Here, the stakes felt infinitely higher, the observers more critical. He had already experimented with a technique layering paint in thin, translucent coats, and found that while it allowed for remarkable depth, it demanded an agonizingly slow pace. He remembered a particular morning when he had attempted to capture the subtle flush on a disciple's cheek, applying the pigment only to find it did not quite blend as he had envisioned. He spent the better part of that day patiently scraping and reapplying, each adjustment a small victory against the looming deadline and his own exacting standards. This constant refinement was not a flaw, he told himself, but the very heart of his artistic exploration. The prior's departure left a lingering sense of unease. Leonardo turned his attention to the figure of Judas, a crucial element in the dramatic narrative. He had been contemplating the best way to portray the inner turmoil of the one who would betray, wanting to avoid a simplistic depiction of villainy. He felt the weight of the story, the complex web of human frailty and flawed devotion. He had been considering leaving Judas partially obscured, his features in shadow, but a deeper artistic impulse urged him to reveal the man's humanity, even in his moment of weakness. This internal debate consumed him, a quiet struggle that played out with every loaded brushstroke, a silent argument with himself about the true nature of sin. A peculiar observation arose from his study of the disciples' hands. He noticed how each hand, whether reaching for bread or gesturing in astonishment, told a unique story of character and emotion. He had spent hours sketching these appendages, marveling at their expressiveness, and now sought to imbue them with the same lifelike quality as the faces. He found a quiet joy in this meticulous detail, a small rebellion against the grandiosity of the overall commission. This pursuit of anatomical truth within the painted form was a familiar comfort, a way to ground the monumental in the observable world, a practice that had served him well since his earliest days of apprenticeship. He paused, a faint smile touching his lips as he recalled a request made by the monks earlier in the week. They had asked if he could depict the moment of betrayal with more clarity, perhaps by placing a subtle, gilded halo around the head of Christ, distinguishing him immediately. Leonardo, however, had quietly demurred, believing that the emotional resonance of the scene should speak for itself, without the need for such overt symbolism. He valued the subtle interplay of light and shadow to guide the viewer's eye, rather than relying on external markers of divinity. He wondered if his preference for understated nuance would ever be fully understood by those accustomed to more direct forms of expression.
The sheer scale of the work meant that many apprentices assisted with the more mundane tasks, grinding pigments and preparing the plaster. He watched as a young boy, no older than 12, carefully mixed a batch of white lead with oil, his tongue sticking out in concentration. Leonardo remembered the same earnestness in his own youthful efforts, the thrill of contributing to something far greater than himself. He felt a certain responsibility towards these young minds, a desire to impart not just technique, but the spirit of inquiry that fueled his own work. He saw in their eager faces the future of his craft, and a part of him hoped they would inherit his relentless curiosity, even as he guarded some of his more unconventional methods. A fellow artist, who had stopped by to offer a word of encouragement, leaned in to examine a section depicting the disciples' astonishment. "Remarkable, Leonardo," he said, his voice a low murmur. "The way you capture that flicker of disbelief in their eyes, it is as if they truly heard the words spoken." He then added, with a knowing glint, "Have you considered using a more traditional binder for the blue pigments? I've heard whispers that some of your experiments are proving temperamental." Leonardo merely smiled, acknowledging the concern while keeping his thoughts to himself. He understood that many artists favored established methods, fearing the risks inherent in innovation. He, however, found the potential rewards of discovery too enticing to ignore. A fellow artist, who had stopped by to offer a word of encouragement, leaned in to examine a section depicting the disciples' astonishment. "Remarkable, Leonardo," he said, his voice a low murmur. "The way you capture that flicker of disbelief in their eyes, it is as if they truly heard the words spoken." He then added, with a knowing glint, "Have you considered using a more traditional binder for the blue pigments? I've heard whispers that some of your experiments are proving temperamental." Leonardo merely smiled, acknowledging the concern while keeping his thoughts to himself. He understood that many artists favored established methods, fearing the risks inherent in innovation. He, however, found the potential rewards of discovery too enticing to ignore. He spent a moment carefully blending a subtle shadow beneath Christ's chin, a detail that would enhance the dimensionality of the face. This meticulous attention to light, to how it fell and shaped form, was an obsession he could not shake. It was the same fascination that had driven him to study the flight of birds, the way their wings caught the wind, and the patterns of water as it flowed over stones. He believed that understanding light was fundamental to understanding reality, and that understanding reality was the artist's highest calling. The refectory's dim light, though challenging, offered a different perspective, forcing him to rely on his inner vision, on his accumulated knowledge of how light behaved. The pressure to complete the work was undeniable. He felt it in the polite inquiries of the monks, the visits from ducal representatives, and the whispers amongst the workshop assistants about the pace of progress. Yet he also felt a deep-seated resistance to rushing the process, to sacrificing nuance for speed. He knew that each layer of paint, each subtle alteration, was a step towards capturing the profound human drama he envisioned. He often found himself in a quiet battle with his own desire for perfection, a struggle that left him both exhilarated and deeply fatigued. He wished for a space where he could truly dedicate himself to the endless refinement of his art, without the constant gaze of expectation. The memory of a failed fresco attempt in Florence, where the plaster had not bonded properly and the colors began to flake within months, still lingered. That experience had instilled in him a cautious approach to new materials and techniques, a deep understanding that beauty could be fleeting, if not anchored by a sound foundation. He was constantly experimenting, testing the limits of his mediums, And this particular mural offered him an unparalleled opportunity to push those boundaries. He hoped that the careful, almost painstaking application of his specialized tempera would result in a work that not only captured the essence of the moment, but also endured for generations to come. As the evening shadows began to lengthen across the refectory floor, casting long, distorted shapes, Leonardo carefully cleaned his brushes, the oil leaving a faint sheen on his hands. The scent of the pigments lingered, a familiar perfume that spoke of both creation and the relentless pursuit of an ideal, while the quiet rustle of the friars preparing for evening prayers offered a gentle counterpoint to the day's intense focus. The accustomed rhythm of Florence's workshops offered a familiar comfort, a stark contrast to the whispered discussions about the Palazzo della Signoria and the grand frescoes commissioned for its walls. Signor Vieri, a merchant whose warehouse overflowed with bolts of fine wool, adjusted the heavy gold chain around his neck, his impatience a palpable force in the shared studio space. He had expected the vast depiction of the Battle of Anghiari to be well underway, a testament to Florentine might for all to see. Yet he found only preliminary sketches and the pervasive scent of drying oil paint. Vieri had heard tales of the master's meticulous nature, of his constant revisions and his fascination with capturing the very essence of movement. But such considerations felt secondary when the city's prestige was at stake. This pursuit of a grand vision, however, often tangled with the practicalities of resource allocation, a fact Signor Vieri understood keenly from his own ventures. He often discussed with his associates the best ways to secure favorable trade routes and the importance of investing in sturdy ships, knowing that without these foundations, his business would falter. Now he found himself applying similar principles to the artistic realm, questioning the wisdom of entrusting such a significant commission to a man known for his protracted methods and unconventional approaches. The rivalry with Maestro Uccello, whose own contribution to the Hall of 500 was already progressing with a more predictable pace, only amplified his unease, adding another layer to the complex interplay of artistic ambition and civic pride. A faint smell of linseed oil and something sharper, perhaps turpentine, reached him as he moved closer to one of the work areas, where a young apprentice carefully mixed pigments. This was the practical side of patronage, the business of transforming raw materials into something of beauty and meaning, a process Vieri appreciated on a fundamental level. He believed deeply in the power of visible achievements to bolster a city's reputation, and these murals were meant to be more than mere decoration. They were to be declarations of Florence's power and artistic supremacy. The allocation of funds for such projects was always a subject of debate, with some council members advocating for more immediate civic improvements, making the successful and timely completion of these grand works crucial for justifying the expenditure. He could hear the low murmur of voices from a neighboring alcove, where Leonardo was engaged in what sounded like a discussion about the intricacies of animal anatomy. Vieri wondered if such detailed study was truly necessary for a battle scene, or if it was another instance of the master's boundless and sometimes distracting curiosity. His own work required a clear focus on the end product, wool spun, dyed, and sold, and he found it difficult to comprehend the artist's seemingly endless exploration of preliminary details. The guilds, he knew, were meant to provide a structure for such endeavors, ensuring quality and adherence to established practices. Yet even they seemed to bend to the unique demands of certain prominent artists. The whispers of competition between the artists themselves were also a common thread in Florentine life, a reflection of the city's vibrant and sometimes cutthroat artistic ecosystem. Vieri had heard it said that Maestro Uccello was painstakingly studying perspective, trying to capture a sense of depth that was revolutionary for its time, while Leonardo was said to be experimenting with new pigments that held both great promise and great risk. He felt a pang of apprehension, recalling the tales of earlier murals that had faded or peeled due to untested methods. The allocation of public funds, he often thought, demanded a certain predictability, a guarantee that the investment would yield a lasting result, a sentiment that fueled his growing concern.
He observed how the shared studio, meant to foster a sense of community and shared learning among artists, also served as a stage for these subtle competitions and displays of burgeoning talent. The apprentices, eager to impress, would mimic the styles of the masters, their own aspirations intertwined with the success of their teachers. Vieri understood the importance of training the next generation, having invested in teaching young men the skills of his trade. But he also recognized the danger of allowing artistic experimentation to overshadow the fundamental need for enduring craftsmanship. The city's reputation, after all, depended on the quality and longevity of its artistic triumphs, not just their initial brilliance. The very air within the workshop seemed charged with a unique energy, a blend of focused intensity and underlying tension. Vieri could see the artists pausing frequently, their movements indicating a need to shift positions or perhaps simply to step back and survey their work from a new vantage point, a practice he recognized as part of the creative process. He understood the necessity of adapting one's approach to different materials and circumstances, much as he had to adjust his trading strategies based on shifting markets and unpredictable weather patterns. Yet the sheer scale of this particular commission and the public expectation it carried made him wish for a more tangible sense of progress, a clearer indication that the artist's vision was firmly anchored in tangible achievement. He wondered if these grand public works, meant to celebrate the city's achievements, also served to highlight the societal value placed on artistry and intellect, a shift from older ways of measuring worth solely by land or military might. The council members who championed these projects spoke of the enduring legacy of beauty and inspiration, and Vieri found himself nodding in agreement, appreciating the city's commitment to cultivating a rich cultural tapestry. However, the practical concerns of funding and execution always hovered in the background, a constant reminder that even the most inspired artistic endeavors required careful management and a keen understanding of the resources available. The day's discussions about the mural's progress had left their mark, but life in the bustling Florentine workshops moved forward with its usual mix of dedication and deliberation.
The biting wind whipped across the Florentine rooftops, carrying with it the acrid smell of tanning leather and the distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer. Leonardo pulled his worn cloak tighter, the chill seeping through the wool despite the midday sun. He had spent the morning sketching the intricate musculature of a fallen horse near the city gates, its once proud form now a testament to the harshness of nature and the unforgiving realities of survival. The memory of the patron's impatient face, demanding the completion of a civic mural, still lingered. That master of coin, accustomed to the swift exchange of goods and services, had shown little understanding for the careful study of anatomy, or indeed the sheer effort required to capture the essence of a charging stallion. He found himself turning towards the Arno, the river a ribbon of silver glinting under the sky. Even here, where the water flowed with a deceptive ease, Leonardo saw the potential for power, for motion that could be harnessed. The patrons and officials in Florence, like the one who had commissioned the Battle of Anghiari, often saw only the finished product, the grand fresco that would adorn a hall of power. They did not see the hours spent observing the way water eddied around stones, or the countless drawings of bird wings spread wide,
their feathers catching the unseen currents of the air. These quiet observations felt more vital, more true, than any hurried brushstroke for a demanding benefactor. The practicalities of life pressed upon him, as they always did. Securing enough fine linen for new paint pigments, or the sturdy wood needed for a new workshop tool, required constant negotiation. He remembered a conversation with a fellow craftsman, a carpenter who specialized in intricate cabinet work, lamenting the scarcity of good poplar for his latest project. That scarcity meant higher prices, and higher prices meant fewer commissions could be accepted, forcing a painful choice between quality and quantity. It was a familiar dance, this constant balancing act between artistic vision and the often meager resources available.
Yet, a different kind of yearning pulled at him, one that transcended the immediate demands of patronage or the acquisition of materials. It was a fascination with the very act of soaring, of defying gravity. He watched the swallows dart and weave through the sky, their flight a ballet of precision and power. He longed to understand the mechanics of their wings, the way they angled and twisted to catch the wind, to achieve such effortless grace. This desire wasn't born of a need for a patron's approval, but from a deep, intrinsic curiosity about the natural world and its hidden workings. He found himself sketching again, not on parchment, but on a scrap of discarded leather, his charcoal moving with a feverish intensity. The imagined structure of a wing took shape, a framework of lightweight wood, perhaps ash or willow, carefully joined. He envisioned it covered with a taut, treated fabric, like the strong canvas used for sails, but lighter, more pliable. The sheer audacity of the endeavor began to dawn on him, the immense challenge of translating the effortless flight of a bird into a man-made contraption. This pursuit felt different from his artistic endeavors. It was a test of understanding, a scientific challenge. He thought of the monks at Santa Maria delle Grazie, their gentle persistence in urging him to complete the Last Supper. While he respected their faith, their desire for completion often clashed with his own internal drive for perfection, for an ideal that seemed to recede as he approached it. The experimental paints he had used there, an attempt to achieve a different kind of luminosity, were a risk, one that still caused him unease when he considered their long-term stability. The Florentine guilds, with their strict regulations and established methods, often felt like a cage. They dictated training, materials, and even the subject matter of artworks. While they provided a structure for artisans, they also stifled innovation. He remembered the quiet murmurings among younger apprentices about the old guard, their adherence to traditional techniques, and the fear that new ideas, if too radical, might be met with outright rejection, or worse, ostracization from the craft.
This feeling of pushing against established boundaries extended to all his inquiries. Even his anatomical studies, conducted in hushed rooms with the sharp scent of disinfectants mingling with less pleasant odors, were a defiance of the prevailing understanding of the human body. The physicians of his time relied on ancient texts, their knowledge often rooted in theory rather than direct observation. He felt a profound disconnect between their pronouncements and the intricate reality revealed by his own careful dissections, the delicate network of nerves and muscles that truly governed movement. He reached into his satchel, pulling out a small, intricately carved wooden bird he had whittled years ago. Its wings were articulated, capable of a limited flapping motion when a small lever was manipulated. It was a toy, a study, a testament to his early fascination, but also a symbol of his aspirations. He turned it over in his hands, feeling the smooth grain of the wood, imagining the forces at play. The practicalities of replicating such a mechanism on a human scale were daunting. The strength required, the balance needed,
These were problems that demanded not just artistic skill, but a deep understanding of physics. He often found himself contemplating the motion of water, its currents and eddies, wondering if there were principles at play that could be applied to the movement of air. This cross-pollination of ideas, drawing from nature's designs to solve mechanical puzzles, was at the heart of his work. He recalled a spirited discussion he had with a younger scholar who championed the study of classical texts above all else, believing that all knowledge worth pursuing had already been discovered by the ancients. While Leonardo respected the wisdom of the past, he felt a stronger pull towards direct observation, towards testing theories against the evidence of his own senses. He believed that the world itself was the greatest library, and that nature held secrets waiting to be unveiled through patient study and experimentation.
The day was drawing to a close, the shadows lengthening across the cobblestone streets. He knew he had to return to his workshop, to continue his work on commissions that funded his more ambitious pursuits. The pressure to produce, to satisfy those who paid for his art, was a constant hum beneath the surface of his thoughts. Yet, as he walked, his gaze drifted upward, towards the vast expanse of the sky, where the first stars were beginning to prick through the deepening blue. The dream of flight, of understanding those unseen currents, remained a potent driving force, a testament to the enduring power of human curiosity against the constraints of the earthly realm. With the cool evening breeze carrying the scent of damp earth and flowering jasmine, Leonardo found a quiet contentment in the familiar patterns of his thoughts, a ceaseless exploration of the world's intricate designs. The damp chill of Rome's early morning air, carrying the faint, sharp scent of wood smoke from countless braziers, clung to Leonardo's cloak as he navigated the winding cobblestone streets. He sought the bustling courtyard of a papal architect, a man known for his ambitious plans for Vatican renovations, whose insights might shed light on the city's grander artistic currents. Florence, with its familiar sun-warmed stones and the predictable rhythm of guild life, felt a distant memory as he stepped into a new world, one dictated by the heavy gold of papal favor and the intricate dance of influence. The very scale of the buildings, rising in monumental tiers of marble, spoke of an authority far removed from the merchant princes he knew. Here, intellectual curiosity seemed to bloom in the shadow of immense power, a stark contrast to the more open debates he'd witnessed in Florentine piazzas. He observed papal officials, their velvet robes a testament to their stations, conversing in hushed tones, their gestures economical and precise, conveying layers of meaning without a single raised voice. The air buzzed with the discourse of humanism, the rediscovered texts of antiquity shaping conversations about philosophy, architecture, and the very nature of man. Yet beneath this intellectual ferment lay a palpable current of rivalry, a subtle jockeying for position and prestige within the papal court. He found himself carefully choosing his words, acutely aware that a misplaced remark could close doors that had only just begun to creak open. He watched as master sculptors and painters presented their portfolios to cardinals, their faces a mixture of hope and trepidation as they awaited judgment. Each commission, whether a grand fresco for a new basilica or an intricate design for a papal procession, represented not just artistic endeavor, but a complex negotiation of status and obligation. Leonardo, having presented his own skills as both artist and engineer, found himself drawn into discussions about fortifications for papal territories and intricate automata for courtly entertainments, tasks that required a different kind of precision than a painter's brush. The sheer volume of artistry on display, a veritable crucible of creative talent, left him both inspired and slightly overwhelmed. The conversations he engaged in, often over cups of spiced wine in shaded loggias,
revealed the nuanced political landscape that underpinned artistic patronage. He learned that a flattering design for a fortress could secure a painter's commission for a chapel, and that a well-timed observation on classical hydraulics might earn favor with a cardinal who collected ancient texts. These interactions were a far cry from the direct commissions of Florence. Here, alliances shifted like sand dunes, and the favor of one powerful figure could wane as quickly as it appeared. He found himself needing to adapt his approach, learning to read the subtle cues of papal ambition and the currents of theological debate that flowed through the Vatican. He overheard whispers about the vast sums being poured into new papal projects, a testament to the wealth and influence of the Church. Yet, these grand endeavors were often shrouded in a degree of secrecy, their progress and purpose debated only amongst those deemed worthy of knowing. He found himself wondering how such immense resources were truly allocated, and what criteria truly determined which artistic visions were brought to life. The sheer scope of the papal administration, with its layers of bureaucracy and its intricate network of advisors and petitioners, felt like navigating a labyrinth where each turn presented a new set of unspoken rules and subtle challenges. One afternoon, while observing the construction of a new papal library, he spoke with a master mason who described the painstaking process of cutting and transporting the massive marble blocks. The mason spoke not of artistic vision, but of practicalities: the strength of the scaffolding, the precise angles of the pulleys, and the sheer number of laborers required to lift stones that dwarfed a grown man. This focus on the material reality of construction, the immense physical effort and coordination needed to realize such monumental designs, offered a grounded perspective on the grandeur he witnessed, a reminder of the human labor behind the divine aspirations. He found himself spending time in the papal gardens, a place of curated beauty where exotic plants from distant lands flourished under careful cultivation. Here, amidst the scent of blooming jasmine and the soft murmur of fountains, he could retreat from the political machinations and focus on the natural world that had always held his deepest fascination. He observed the intricate patterns of veins on a leaf, the delicate structure of a bird's wing as it alighted on a branch, and the way light played across the polished surfaces of classical statuary, finding a quiet solace in these moments of pure observation. These moments of natural contemplation offered a necessary counterpoint to the complex social demands of the Roman court. These periods of quiet study, however, were often punctuated by reminders of the shifting allegiances and the ever-present political currents. He saw artists whose fortunes had risen and fallen with the favor of different popes or powerful families, their earlier masterpieces now overshadowed by newer, more politically expedient works. He realized that in Rome, art was not merely an expression of beauty or a testament to skill. It was often a tool of power, a means of projecting authority and reinforcing doctrine, and this understanding shaped his own interactions and his careful consideration of potential commissions. The intellectual vibrancy of Rome was undeniable, a potent mix of ancient wisdom and burgeoning new ideas that created a stimulating, if sometimes volatile, environment. He found himself in conversations with scholars and theologians, their discussions often touching upon the very foundations of knowledge and the interpretation of Scripture. Yet he also sensed a subtle undercurrent of anxiety, a concern that the rapid pace of change might somehow undermine established order. This tension between intellectual exploration and the preservation of tradition seemed to permeate many aspects of Roman life, influencing art, architecture, and even the smallest of daily exchanges. As he continued his work, Leonardo remained keenly aware of the precarious balance he had to maintain. He sought to engage with the immense creative energy of the city, to learn from its masters and contribute his own unique perspective, all while navigating the complex web of papal politics and the ever-present need to secure the patronage that allowed his inquiries to flourish. The grand marble halls that surrounded him felt both ancient and eternal. Young Niccolò adjusted the worn leather strap of his satchel, the smooth, cool surface a familiar comfort against his nervous fingers. The Florentine sun, though not yet high, already warmed the stone flags of the piazza, and a pleasant din of merchants calling their wares and the distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer filled the morning. He was here, at the workshop of the esteemed Master Leonardo, a place whispered about with awe by all the apprentices in the city. Niccolò imagined the master himself, his hands perhaps smudged with charcoal or stained with pigment, guiding the careful strokes of his pupils. He had heard tales of Leonardo's generosity, how he treated even the youngest of them with a patient curiosity, and this thought eased the tightness in his chest as he approached the large arched doorway.
The air inside the workshop was thick with the sharp tang of linseed oil and the faint, dry scent of shaved wood. Sunlight poured through high windows, illuminating swirling dust that caught the light like tiny golden insects. Apprentices, some younger than Niccolò, others bearing the confident stance of those nearing mastery, moved about their tasks with a focused energy. Niccolò found a spot near a workbench cluttered with sketches of fantastical machines and studies of bird wings. He watched a boy, barely older than himself, painstakingly grind pigments, his brow furrowed in concentration. The boy looked up, offering a quick, friendly nod before returning to his work, a simple gesture that made Niccolò feel a little less adrift in this bustling new world. Master Leonardo himself emerged from a more private chamber, his gaze sweeping over the organized chaos. He wasn't the stern, imposing figure Niccolò had half expected, but a man of quiet presence, his eyes sharp and observing. He paused by the young pigment grinder, offering a few words that Niccolò couldn't quite catch, but the boy's posture straightened with pride at the attention. Leonardo then turned his attention to a group sketching from a draped statue, his voice calm as he pointed out the subtle interplay of light and shadow. It was a subtle art, this teaching, not just of how to hold a brush or carve stone, but of how to truly see. Niccolò felt a pang of longing as he watched Leonardo demonstrate a technique for creating soft, blended edges, a method the master called sfumato. It was like coaxing color from the air itself, a far cry from the stark lines Niccolò was used to. He tried to replicate it on his own practice parchment, but his lines remained stubbornly defined, his shading too abrupt. Beside him, another apprentice, Marco, chuckled softly. "Needs more patience, young Niccolò," Marco whispered, his own work already showing a smoother finish. The master teaches us to look beyond the obvious, to find the shades in between. Later, a group of senior apprentices gathered around Leonardo, their voices hushed with respectful inquiry. They spoke of a new commission for a noble family, a portrait that required capturing the sitter's exact temperament. Leonardo listened intently, then offered advice, not in commands, but in guiding questions. He spoke of observing the subtle shifts in a person's expression, the way their hands rested, the very rhythm of their breath. To paint a likeness, Leonardo said, his gaze thoughtful, one must first understand the soul, and for that we must listen to the stories they don't even tell themselves. The conversation then turned to the intricacies of casting bronze, a subject that had fascinated Niccolò since he first saw the great equestrian statue in Milan. Leonardo spoke of the molten metal's flow, the careful preparation of the mold, and the immense heat generated. He described a method he had been considering, using a different kind of clay for the inner core, something to prevent cracking during the pour.
The apprentices debated its merits, their arguments respectful but earnest, each offering their own observations from similar, though lesser, projects. It was during this discussion that Niccolo learned of a peculiar debate among scholars and artisans regarding the proper preservation of ancient texts. Some argued for keeping them in dark, dry places, believing light and moisture were the greatest enemies of parchment. Others, however, insisted that controlled exposure to natural light was necessary to strengthen the inks and prevent their fading over centuries. Niccolo found himself wondering which approach held true wisdom, as the very texts that contained the old knowledge seemed to hold secrets even about their own survival. As the day wore on, the workshop buzzed with activity. Some apprentices were carefully cleaning brushes, while others practiced drawing geometric shapes with painstaking precision. Leonardo himself moved between them, offering a word of encouragement here, a gentle correction there. He seemed to possess an inexhaustible well of patience, as if each small step in their learning was a crucial part of a much larger, unfolding design. Niccolo felt a growing sense of belonging, a quiet understanding that this was a place where curiosity was not just tolerated, but nurtured. He watched Leonardo closely when the master examined a half-finished painting of a woman holding a small bird. Leonardo's fingers traced the delicate outline of the bird's wing, and he spoke softly, almost to himself, about capturing the feather's lightness. He then picked up a fine brush, dipping it into a mixture of ochre and white, and with a few almost invisible strokes, added a shimmer to the bird's eye that made it seem alive. It was a fleeting moment, but Niccolo felt as though he had glimpsed something profound about the transformation of pigment into reality. Marco, wiping a smudge of charcoal from his cheek, leaned over to Niccolo. "The master has a way of seeing things differently, doesn't he?" he remarked, gesturing with his chin towards Leonardo, who was now sketching with swift, confident movements in a small leather-bound book. "He's not just painting a woman, he's painting the air around her, the thoughts behind her eyes." Niccolo nodded, understanding dawning. It was this deeper perception, this desire to capture the essence of things, that set Leonardo apart from all the others he had heard about. The apprentices were not merely students of art, they were also students of observation. Leonardo often tasked them with bringing him drawings of plants, insects, or rock formations, encouraging them to note every detail, every vein on a leaf, every facet of a beetle's shell. Niccolo found himself spending hours in the gardens, his gaze fixed on the intricate patterns of a spider's web, the way dew collected on its threads. He learned to see the beauty in the mundane, to appreciate the complex artistry of the natural world that Leonardo so clearly revered. One afternoon, Leonardo gathered the apprentices to discuss the construction of a new canal system he had designed for a nearby town. He unrolled a large, detailed drawing explaining the principles of water flow and the engineering challenges involved. The apprentices listened, some asking questions about the load-bearing capacity of different stones, others about the mechanics of the sluice gates. It was clear that Leonardo's genius spanned not just the canvas, but the very fabric of the world around them, a world that seemed to hold endless problems waiting for clever solutions. As the day drew to a close, the workshop began to quiet. The apprentices tidied their tools, the scent of oil and pigment now tinged with the cooling evening air. Leonardo remained by his desk, poring over his notes, his brow furrowed in thought. Niccolo, gathering his own simple sketches, felt a profound sense of gratitude for the day's experiences. He had seen not just a master at work, but a mind that seemed to embrace the entire spectrum of human knowledge, from the delicate curve of a smile to the powerful flow of water. In the gathering twilight, Niccolo carried the day's learning into the quiet of his own rest. The linen felt rough against Niccolo's skin, a familiar texture that marked the start of his day. He rubbed his eyes, the lingering scent of oil paints and linseed oil still clinging to the air, a testament to the late hours he and the other apprentices had kept. Master Leonardo had been at his easel again, his concentration so deep it seemed to draw the very light into the room. Today, Niccolò's task was to prepare the pigments for a new commission, a portrait of a merchant's wife, a woman whose placid expression held a hint of something more, something the master was intent on capturing. He carefully ground the lapis lazuli, the fine blue dust clinging to his fingertips, knowing that each hue, each subtle shade, was part of a much larger, slower unfolding. He carried the prepared pigments to the master's corner of the workshop, a space that felt both organized and endearingly chaotic. Brushes of all sizes stood in clay pots, their bristles stiff with dried paint, and scattered among them were small polished stones and delicate bird feathers, objects of study that seemed as important as any tool of the trade. Leonardo looked up, his gaze, usually so intense, softened with a quiet acknowledgement. He took a small portion of the blue and mixed it with a clear medium, his hands moving with a practiced grace that Niccolò still found himself watching with an almost reverent awe. This was not the hurried work of satisfying a patron's immediate demand. This was a slow, deliberate creation, where every touch seemed to be a question posed to the canvas.
The sitter, Lisa del Giocondo, had visited several times now, her presence a quiet ripple in the workshop's usual hum. Niccolò observed her from a distance, noticing how the master would sometimes leave her to gaze out of the window, her posture subtly shifting, her expression occasionally changing, as if reacting to an unseen thought. He wondered what invisible currents flowed between the master and his subject, what unspoken dialogue was being translated into strokes of paint. The master himself seemed to be in a perpetual state of consideration, his brow furrowed, not with frustration, but with deep thought. This portrait, Niccolò sensed, was not merely a likeness, but an exploration, a sustained dialogue between the artist and his muse that stretched across many days, even weeks, with no clear endpoint in sight. Indeed, the master often spoke of paintings as never truly being finished, only abandoned. Niccolò understood this sentiment more deeply now, seeing the layers upon layers of translucent color being applied, each one modifying the one beneath it, creating a depth that seemed to breathe. He remembered the urgency of some of the older apprentices, eager to declare a work complete and move on to the next commission, their canvases vibrant but perhaps lacking this subtle, lived-in quality. Leonardo, however, seemed content to return to this face, to this particular arrangement of light and shadow, again and again, as if waiting for a final, elusive truth to reveal itself in the curve of a smile or the gentle fold of drapery. The master's approach to this portrait stood in stark contrast to the commissioned works that often filled the Florentine art scene. Those pieces, Niccolò knew, from hushed conversations among the journeymen, were often driven by deadlines and the desire of wealthy patrons to display their status with swiftness and clarity. This portrait, however, felt different. It was a private pursuit, a quiet obsession that the master carried with him, often working on it when other tasks were set aside. He would carefully wrap the panel in cloth and carry it with him, suggesting a devotion that went beyond mere duty or the fulfillment of a contract.
Niccolò pondered the nature of such dedication. Was it a sign of artistic integrity, a refusal to compromise on vision? Or was it something else entirely, a profound personal engagement with the act of creation itself? He observed Leonardo's careful study of light as it fell on different surfaces, the way he would tilt his head, his eyes squinting slightly, absorbing the nuances that most would overlook. This attention to detail was not just about technical skill. It was about a deep curiosity that seemed to fuel every stroke, a desire to understand not just the surface of things, but the hidden depths that lay beneath. He recalled a conversation with a visiting scholar who spoke of the rediscovered writings of the ancient Greeks and Romans, of philosophies that celebrated reason and the exploration of the natural world. The master, it seemed, embodied this spirit of inquiry, extending it into the very fabric of artistic creation. He would often pause his work to sketch a bird in flight outside the window, or to examine the structure of a nearby plant, his mind seemingly capable of holding multiple streams of thoughts simultaneously. This portrait, in its slow unfolding, was merely one facet of that vast interconnected world of observation and understanding that Leonardo inhabited. The mystery of the sitter's smile was particularly captivating. It was not a broad, joyful expression, but something far more subtle, a slight upturn of the lips that seemed to hold a secret. Niccolò wondered if the master sought to capture not just an emotion, but the very essence of human thought and feeling, the fleeting moments that shaped a person's inner life. He watched as Leonardo would gently adjust the shade of a highlight on the cheek or deepen the shadow around the mouth, each tiny change altering the overall impression of the face, transforming it from a mere depiction into something that felt alive, a presence rather than a representation. This constant refinement, this refusal to settle for a readily apparent solution, was a source of quiet fascination and, at times, a subtle tension within the workshop. Some of the other apprentices, those who aspired to the more immediate rewards of their craft, sometimes grumbled about the master's seeming indecision. They saw a finished product in the initial sketch, a completed work in the first few layers of paint, and struggled to comprehend the master's protracted engagement. Yet Niccolò felt a growing understanding of this deliberate pace, recognizing that true mastery, as demonstrated by Leonardo, often involved a sustained wrestling with the subject, a continuous refinement that pushed the boundaries of what was thought possible. He continued his work grinding pigments, the rhythmic scraping of the stone a familiar counterpoint to the silent intensity of the master's focus. The late afternoon sun slanted through the high windows, casting long shadows across the floor, and it illuminated the subtle shifts in the portrait's surface as the master applied another whisper-thin glaze. The process felt less like the application of paint and more like the gradual emergence of a soul from its physical form. It was a testament to the power of patience and the relentless pursuit of an ideal that existed not just in the master's mind, but in the very act of its creation. As the day began to draw to a close, Niccolò observed the master carefully clean his brushes, his movements economical and precise. The portrait, still far from what might be considered a finished work by many, already possessed a compelling presence, an enigmatic quality that seemed to draw one in. The master's reluctance to declare it complete spoke to a deeper understanding of art, one that valued process and continuous exploration over a hasty finality. It was a lesson Niccolò was beginning to internalize, understanding that the most profound creations were often those born not of immediate inspiration, but of a long, patient dialogue with the materials and the subject. The weight of the pigments felt familiar in his hands as he put them away for the evening. The day's work was done, but the questions raised by the master's persistent engagement with the portrait lingered, prompting contemplation on the nature of art and the enduring pursuit of perfection. Niccolò settled into his evening routine. Tomorrow would bring its own demands, and perhaps another subtle shift in the enigmatic smile. The ink, still dark and potent on the page, smelled faintly of lamp oil and crushed walnut shells. Leonardo, his fingers smudged with the very residue of his thoughts, leaned back from the rough-hewn table.
Around him, the quiet hum of his Milani's workshop was punctuated by the gentle rasp of charcoal on paper and the occasional soft thud of a discarded sketch. This secluded space, away from the clamor of court and the demands of patrons, was where the true mapping of his mind began. He turned a page, revealing a meticulously rendered cross-section of a bird's wing, each feather barb painstakingly drawn, the bone structure clearly articulated. It was in these quiet hours, with only his observations and the rustle of paper for company, that the most profound understandings were born. He paused, recalling a conversation from weeks past, a whispered query from a concerned apprentice, Marco, who had stumbled upon one of the more cryptic entries. Marco, still young and accustomed to the straightforward commands of painting, had looked at a detailed diagram of human musculature, complete with annotations in his master's mirrored script, and asked, "Maestro, what purpose do these dissections serve, if not to teach us how to better render the flesh upon the canvas?" The question hung in the air, not entirely accusatory, but tinged with a bewilderment that Leonardo understood. It was difficult for many to grasp the drive that compelled him to understand the inner workings of things, rather than merely their outward appearance. He paused, recalling a conversation from weeks past, a whispered query from a concerned apprentice, Marco, who had stumbled upon one of the more cryptic entries. Marco, still young and accustomed to the straightforward commands of painting, had looked at a detailed diagram of human musculature, complete with annotations in his master's mirrored script, and asked, "Maestro, what purpose do these dissections serve, if not to teach us how to better render the flesh upon the canvas?" The question hung in the air, not entirely accusatory, but tinged with a bewilderment that Leonardo understood. It was difficult for many to grasp the drive that compelled him to understand the inner workings of things, rather than merely their outward appearance.
The societal constraints on such deep inquiry were a constant, quiet pressure. There were those who muttered about sacrilege, about the unnaturalness of peering into God's creation with such unflinching detail. He remembered the nervous glances of the hospital attendants when he had secured permission to examine a recently deceased beggar. The air in the cramped, shadowed room filled with the sharp, clean scent of drying herbs used to mask the less pleasant odors. These expeditions were not for mere curiosity. They were a fundamental part of his quest to comprehend the mechanics of life itself. Each sinew, each artery, each bone represented a marvel of engineering, a testament to a design far more intricate than any human architect could conceive. This desire to dissect and understand extended far beyond the confines of the human body. He would spend hours observing the swirling patterns of water in the Arno River, his charcoal capturing the eddies and currents, the way the force of the flow shaped the pebbles beneath its surface. He'd meticulously record the growth of a plant, sketching the unfurling of leaves, the delicate structure of its petals, noting how sunlight affected its color and form. These observations, meticulously detailed in his notebooks, were the raw material from which his broader inquiries sprang, each a single thread in a vast, interconnected tapestry of knowledge. He considered the curious manner in which water, when channeled, could exert tremendous force, a concept he frequently revisited. One particularly memorable afternoon, while sketching the flight of a pigeon in the Piazza del Duomo, he'd been approached by a learned man from the university, a scholar who, with a mixture of disdain and fascination, had examined the drawings. "These are meticulous," the scholar had conceded, his tone suggesting that such detail was perhaps a waste of intellect. "But where is the philosophy in them? Where is the reasoned argument, the citation of ancient wisdom?" Leonardo had simply offered a slight nod, his gaze returning to the effortless glide of the bird. He wondered if this learned man, with his scrolls and pronouncements, ever truly saw the miracle of flight, the perfect balance of form and air.
The potential for his vast collection of observations to be lost or misunderstood was a quiet concern that often settled upon him during these solitary hours. He wrote in his characteristic mirrored script, a deliberate act to safeguard his thoughts from casual eyes, though he knew true security lay in the clarity and organization of his ideas. He had witnessed how easily knowledge could be misinterpreted, how centuries of accumulated learning could be built upon faulty foundations. The challenge, then, was not just to observe and record, but to synthesize, to find the underlying principles that connected the flight of a bird to the flow of a river, or the structure of a bone to the mechanics of a machine. He recalled a patron, a wealthy merchant who, after commissioning a large fresco, had insisted that Leonardo include more gilded ornamentation, proclaiming, "Gold, Master Leonardo, is the true testament to God's blessing, not the intricate veins of a leaf or the musculature of a horse's leg." The man had fluttered his hands dismissively, implying that such detailed, earthy observations were beneath a true artist. This particular interaction, a common enough experience, highlighted the societal gap between understanding the visible glory of creation and understanding the hidden mechanisms that brought it into being. Many simply saw the surface, the immediate beauty, without pondering the intricate design beneath. It was during these periods of intense private study that Leonardo wrestled with the societal constraints on scientific exploration and dissemination. While Florence celebrated its artists and philosophers, the deeper, more empirical investigations, the ones that required looking beyond accepted texts and into the very fabric of the natural world, were often met with suspicion or indifference. He had developed a personal system for cataloging his findings, a complex arrangement of cross-references and thematic groupings that he felt would one day unlock the deeper connections he perceived. This method, while effective for his own understanding, presented a formidable barrier to anyone else attempting to navigate the vastness of his collected knowledge. He often thought of the sheer volume of his accumulated observations. Pages filled with notes on hydraulics, anatomy, botany, optics, mechanics, each a universe of inquiry in itself. He'd painstakingly sketched gears and levers, dreaming of machines that could lift great weights or mimic the movements of living things. His studies of water dynamics were so thorough that he could predict the behavior of currents with remarkable accuracy, a skill that had proven useful in advising on canal construction. These were not idle diversions, they were integral to his worldview, each discovery reinforcing the belief that the universe operated according to elegant, understandable principles. The pressure to prioritize commissions, to meet the often pressing deadlines of patrons eager for finished works, sometimes felt like a physical weight. Yet he found he could not simply abandon these deeper pursuits. They were not separate from his art. They were the very foundation upon which it rested. How could one paint a believable human form without understanding how the muscles moved beneath the skin? How could one depict the subtle play of light and shadow without understanding the physics of light itself? These questions drove him, compelling him to fill page after page, his hand moving with a relentless energy. He remembered the quiet satisfaction of successfully designing a water clock that maintained remarkable accuracy, a small triumph born from his studies of fluid resistance and spring tension. This was a tangible result, a confirmation that his detailed observations and meticulous calculations held practical value. He knew that many of his designs for flying machines, for instance, remained theoretical, hindered by the limitations of materials and the sheer difficulty of translating observation into tangible construction.
However, the understanding gained from these attempts was invaluable in itself, a necessary step in the long process of scientific discovery. He often pondered the fact that the very script he used to record these profound discoveries was itself a unique cultural adaptation. His mirrored writing, easily decipherable to him with a simple glance and a polished surface, served as a subtle guard against prying eyes. This practice, while born from a desire for privacy, also contributed to the isolation of his research. He knew that for his findings to truly benefit others, they needed to be shared, to be integrated into the broader currents of human knowledge. Yet, the path from his private study to public understanding was fraught with challenges, a realization that tempered his enthusiasm with a quiet pragmatism. He sighed softly, the sound almost lost in the workshop's gentle murmur. The sketch before him, a detailed rendering of the inner workings of a human heart, complete with valves and chambers, was a testament to years of dedicated study. He felt a sense of deep satisfaction, not just from the accuracy of the drawing, but from the gradual unveiling of nature's secrets. Each completed sketch, each carefully annotated observation was a step forward, a small victory against ignorance. Around the workshop, the familiar sounds of daily life continued their ancient rhythm. The city's hum was a constant companion, a vibrant pulse against the stone walls of Florence. Today, however, it seemed to beat with a different rhythm, a stirring of old beliefs and new ideas that made some folk uneasy. Outside the baker's shop, where the warm scent of yeast and baking bread hung in the morning air, two men spoke in hushed tones. One, a stonemason named Giorgio, nervously adjusted the rough wool tunic that clung to his shoulders in the growing warmth. He wiped a bead of sweat from his brow with the back of his hand, his gaze darting towards the grand Piazza della Signoria. "They say the scholars in the new academy are teaching things that contradict what our grandfathers knew," Giorgio murmured, his voice barely audible above the clang of a blacksmith's hammer nearby. He often felt this unease, a sense that the very ground beneath his feet was shifting as the world around him changed at an astonishing pace. The familiar rhythm of his own life, chipping away at stone, felt suddenly distant from these grand discussions. His companion, a weaver named Lucia, nodded, her fingers stilling their work on a length of fine linen. She had heard the talk too, the whispers of rediscovered texts from long ago, filled with philosophies that challenged the established order of things. "My cousin, who attends these lectures, speaks of how they look at the stars and speak of numbers that would make your head spin," she replied, a slight tremor in her voice. The comfort of tradition, of knowing one's place, felt threatened by this influx of unknown thoughts. "And this talk of the body," Giorgio continued, lowering his voice further, "that the humors are not the only way to understand how we fall ill, that there are intricate workings within us, unseen, that govern our very breath." He found himself wondering if these new ways of seeing would leave no room for the old wisdom, the practical knowledge passed down through generations that had served them well enough. Meanwhile, across the piazza, a group of young men gathered, their faces alight with discussion. They spoke animatedly about ancient poets and philosophers, their voices carrying the excitement of discovery. One of them, a scribe named Marco, held a scroll unfurled, pointing to passages written in a script that looked both familiar and strangely foreign. The words seemed to hum with a new kind of understanding, a way of thinking about the world that made the familiar feel suddenly new. These young men, touched by the rediscovery of classical learning, saw a world brimming with potential, a tapestry woven with threads of both old wisdom and emergent thought. They debated the merits of different forms of governance, drawing inspiration from republics of ages past, imagining new ways for their own city to flourish. The very air seemed to crackle with the energy of their ideas, a stark contrast to the quiet apprehension of those who clung to the familiar. Lucia watched them, a knot of uncertainty tightening in her stomach. She understood the importance of new fabrics and finer threads for her trade, but these grander ideas felt both distant and deeply unsettling. What did it mean for her own simple life if the very foundations of understanding were being questioned so openly? It was as if the rules of the game were being rewritten while the players were still on the field.
Giorgio sighed, picking up his chisel again. He knew his work was with the tangible, the stone that would form the walls of churches and palaces, enduring structures that spoke of steadfastness. Yet he could not shake the feeling that even these solid foundations were being subtly tested by the winds of change blowing through the city. He wondered if the artisan's skill, so rooted in tradition, could truly keep pace with minds that sought to redraw the very maps of knowledge. The sun climbed higher, casting longer shadows across the cobblestones, and the conversations continued, a testament to the city's vibrant, sometimes conflicting spirit. The scent of roasted almonds from a nearby stall mingled with the faint aroma of parchment and ink carried on the breeze. This period of discovery, while bringing forth new marvels, also brought forth questions, forcing each person to consider where they stood in this evolving world. It was a time for reflection, for each individual to decide which currents of thought would guide their own lives. One could almost feel the collective breath of the city, a shared moment of wonder and apprehension. Were these new philosophies merely fleeting trends, or were they the bedrock of a future yet unimagined? The seeds of change were everywhere, carried on the tongues of scholars and the whispers of the marketplace, waiting to take root in the hearts and minds of those who lived within these ancient walls. The scent of lamp oil lingered as the artisans considered all that had transpired. The scent of roasting meat, mingling with the sharp tang of wood smoke, usually brought a sense of comfort, but today it only amplified the gnawing unease. For weeks now, word had trickled down from the north. Tales of armored men marching, of banners bearing unfamiliar crests. The jovial laughter from the tavern near the piazza now seemed hollow, a desperate attempt to drown out the whispers of invasion. These were not the familiar skirmishes between city-states. This felt like a tide turning, a fundamental shift that threatened to wash away everything. The familiar rhythm of Florentine life, so carefully cultivated over years, felt brittle, ready to shatter. The news reached Leonardo not through pronouncements from on high, but through the worried discussions of artisans and merchants in the piazza. A respected goldsmith, his hands usually steady with the delicate touch of filigree, wrung his hands as he spoke of how the Lombardy trade routes, already strained, were now effectively cut off. This disruption meant fewer raw materials, fewer precious stones arriving from distant lands, and consequently, a tightening of purses for commissions. The Duke, Ludovico Sforza, whose patronage had once seemed as solid as Milan's fortress walls, was now facing a significantly altered reality. The news that the French king, Charles VIII, had marched through Italy with a formidable army, overthrowing old alliances, meant that the stability Leonardo had grown accustomed to was now a distant memory. Leonardo, whose mind often dwelled on the mechanics of war machines and fortifications, found his thoughts turning to the practicalities of defense. He had, in his time in Milan, offered suggestions for improving siege engines and reinforced ramparts, insights born from countless hours studying the trajectory of projectiles and the structural integrity of stone. Now, those musings felt less like intellectual exercises and more like urgent necessities. He sought out a master mason, a man whose knowledge of stonework was as deep as the quarry's depths, hoping to glean his perspective on reinforcing the city's outer walls. The mason, a weathered man named Antonio, spoke of the difficulty in obtaining quality stone and the growing scarcity of skilled laborers, many of whom had been conscripted or had fled the encroaching instability. Antonio's weathered face, etched with years of sun and worry, spoke volumes without the need for many words. He gestured towards the construction of a new bell tower, a project that had once represented Florentine ambition, now seemingly a quaint folly against the backdrop of military movements. The funds for such endeavors, Antonio began, his voice rough like unpolished granite, are being diverted, Master Leonardo. The Signoria, the governing council, they are now focused on provisioning, on securing our borders, rather than embellishing our skyline. It's a hard choice, but a necessary one, to ensure there is a skyline left to embellish. This stark reality of resource conflict, where artistic endeavors were sacrificed for immediate survival, settled heavily upon Leonardo, a stark contrast to the intellectual freedom he usually cherished.
The news from Naples, where the French king had indeed captured the city, sent tremors of apprehension through the Florentine populace. It wasn't just the military might that unnerved them, but the very idea of foreign dominion. People spoke of the customs and laws of these northern invaders, questioning how they would impact Florentine life and traditions. Would the vibrant artistic exchange that defined their city be stifled? Would their guilds, so central to their identity, be subjected to foreign rule? These cultural tensions simmered beneath the surface, a constant undercurrent of anxiety that made every rumor from the north feel like a personal threat. Leonardo, while concerned by the broader implications, found himself increasingly drawn to the practicalities of this unfolding conflict. He listened intently as a seasoned captain, one who had served on the city's defense for decades, described the weaknesses in their current fortifications. The captain spoke of outdated battlements and the need for more effective artillery placement, ideas that resonated deeply with Leonardo's own studies of siege warfare. He remembered sketching designs for rapid-firing crossbows and defensive towers that could swivel, concepts that seemed to have been dismissed as too fanciful during more peaceful times. The captain, noticing Leonardo's keen interest, asked if he had ever considered applying his mind to such matters with greater urgency. This direct challenge, from a man whose life's work was the protection of the city, pushed Leonardo to consider his own role more actively. He found himself wrestling with a decision. His patrons often sought beauty and innovation in art, but the current need was for resilience and defense. To dedicate his energies to the grim business of war machines felt like a departure from his artistic calling, yet the very survival of his city, and by extension, the continuation of his art, depended on security. He recalled conversations with his former master, Verrocchio, who had also been commissioned for military designs, and the way he had balanced both pursuits. Could he, too, navigate this complex landscape?
A group of laborers, their faces grim, gathered near the city gate, discussing the latest reports. They spoke of the need for more manpower to bolster the defenses, of the logistical nightmare of supplying an army in the field. Their anxieties were palpable, not just about the threat of battle, but about the disruption to their livelihoods, the uncertainty of when they would next earn a steady wage. This collective concern, a shared vulnerability, highlighted the communal aspect of survival. The fate of one was inextricably linked to the fate of all. Their quiet grumbling, a low murmur of shared apprehension, painted a picture of a city bracing for impact. Later, amidst the quiet of his workshop, the rhythmic scratching of his quill was punctuated by the distant sound of marching feet. It was not the measured tread of a parade, but a more urgent, determined rhythm.
He found himself sketching not soaring birds or delicate floral patterns, but the sharp angles of catapults and the interlocking plates of armor. He imagined the weight of a well-aimed cannonball, the force required to breach a stone wall. This shift in focus felt less like a choice and more like an inevitability, a response to the changing pressures of the world around him. The very act of drawing these designs felt like a conversation with the approaching storm. He shared some of his preliminary ideas with a younger apprentice, a bright-eyed boy named Filippo, who was struggling with the precise application of gesso for a fresco. Filippo, his brow furrowed with concentration, listened to Leonardo's descriptions of reinforced wooden frameworks and improved counterweight systems for siege towers. He then looked at his own work, the careful preparation of the wall, and mused, "Master, it is difficult to think of beauty when one hears such talk of destruction. Yet, is not the defense of our homes as important as the adornment of our churches?" Filippo's innocent question struck at the heart of the dilemma, bridging the gap between artistic creation and practical necessity.
The influx of refugees from regions already touched by the French advance added another layer of complexity. These displaced families brought with them tales of hardship and loss, their presence a stark reminder of the real human cost of warfare. They sought shelter and sustenance, placing additional strain on the city's resources. Observing their quiet desperation, Leonardo felt a profound sense of responsibility. It was one thing to design machines on paper, another to witness the very real consequences of conflict on the lives of ordinary people, people who deserved safety and peace. As the days turned into weeks, the atmosphere in Florence shifted from anxious anticipation to a more resolute preparedness. The clang of hammers on metal, once the sound of craft, now echoed with the urgency of weaponsmithing and armor repair. Leonardo found himself advising on the construction of new artillery pieces, his understanding of mechanics proving invaluable. He remembered a conversation with an engineer from a distant land who had spoken of the strategic advantage of well-placed defenses, a lesson that now seemed prescient. The careful calculations, the testing of wood and metal, became a new form of artistic expression, a testament to the resilience of human ingenuity. The demands on his time multiplied, pulling him in multiple directions. While the Signoria consulted him on military matters, the guilds still sought his artistic expertise for ongoing projects. He found himself explaining to a group of stonemasons how to incorporate a particular structural reinforcement into a defensive bastion, a design that incorporated principles of balance and load distribution he had observed in natural forms. He could almost feel the weight of their trust, the hope that his knowledge could provide a tangible shield against the looming threat. This new role, that of an advisor on practical, life-saving applications, felt both heavy and strangely fulfilling. In these quiet moments, surrounded by his sketches of both war machines and anatomical studies, Leonardo could almost forget the weight of the looming conflict.
The air in Amboise carried the scent of blooming orchards and distant salty seas. Leonardo, his hands now gnarled with age, found a comfortable stillness he had seldom known. King Francis, a man who spoke with a youthful energy that belied the weight of his crown, had granted him the manor of Clos Lucé, a place of quiet elegance where the pursuit of knowledge was not just permitted but celebrated. Here, amidst rolling French hills, the master worked with a different kind of urgency, one born not of impatient patrons or the clamor of courtly life, but of a deep internal dialogue with the world he had so meticulously observed. His days were filled with the rustle of parchment as he revisited his countless sketches, the delicate scratch of his pen as he added new observations about the peculiar habits of the local kingfishers. and the low murmur of conversation with his loyal companions, Salai and Melzi. The king himself would often visit, his enthusiasm for the master's insights a vibrant contrast to the court's usual formalities. Francis, eager to absorb the wisdom of the renowned Florentine, would lean close to examine the intricate drawings of anatomical structures or the detailed schematics for ingenious water systems. He'd speak of his own ambitions, of the grand chateau he envisioned along the Loire, and listen intently as Leonardo offered practical advice, weaving engineering principles into discussions of architecture and defense. These conversations, held in sun-dappled courtyards or by crackling fires, fostered a unique bond, demonstrating how a ruler's vision could be both inspired by and shaped by a master's deep understanding of the world. Yet, even in this tranquil setting, a sense of transition permeated the air. Leonardo, his eyesight dimming and his body growing weary, felt the persistent call of his life's work, much of which remained undocumented in the eyes of the world. He would spend hours arranging his notebooks, carefully gathering the studies on hydraulics, the detailed observations of plant life, and the complex mechanical designs, a growing concern for their future preservation weighing on his mind. The sheer volume of his inquiries, spanning so many disciplines, felt both a monumental achievement and a daunting challenge to bequeath effectively to those who might follow.
He observed the younger artists who occasionally found their way to Amboise, their eager faces mirroring his own youthful curiosity, yet their approaches often differed. While they possessed a keenness for capturing the immediate likeness of a subject, their understanding of the underlying principles of form, light, and natural law seemed less profound. Leonardo offered guidance, demonstrating the subtle layering of paint that created lifelike skin tones, or the importance of studying the musculature beneath the surface. But he often wondered if they truly grasped the interconnectedness of all things he had come to see. This generational divide was not one of talent, but of a holistic approach to understanding the universe, a perspective he had cultivated over a lifetime of intense observation and diligent practice. The king, recognizing this subtle concern, often spoke of fostering a true academy, a place where the master's vast knowledge could be systematically organized. And Francis envisioned a center of learning that would transcend the fleeting demands of commissions, a sanctuary for intellectual exploration. He would proudly display the master's works, both paintings and sketches, to visiting dignitaries, emphasizing that Leonardo's gifts extended far beyond the canvas, encompassing a deep understanding of mechanics, anatomy, and the natural world. These public acknowledgments, while flattering, also underscored the immense scope of what Leonardo felt he still had to impart. In his quiet moments, Leonardo would often look out over the tranquil French countryside, the gentle slopes and meandering rivers a familiar beauty. He traced the lines of the landscape in his mind, seeing not just trees and water, but the intricate flow of forces, the delicate balance of ecosystems, the very mechanics of existence. His mind would drift back to the bustling workshops of Florence, the grand courts of Milan, the hallowed halls of Rome, recalling the vibrant energy and the constant drive to create, to innovate, and to understand. It was a life lived in perpetual pursuit of knowledge, a journey through art and science that seemed to have no end. The sheer variety of his explorations meant that even his final years were filled with intellectual engagement. He would experiment with new inks, document the changing seasons with renewed fascination, and continue to refine his theories on optics and hydraulics, his insights flowing from a deep wellspring of accumulated experience. The presence of his devoted pupils, Francesco Melzi especially, provided a comforting continuity,
as Melzi diligently helped organize and copy his master's extensive writings, ensuring that the insights gathered over decades would not be lost to time and the vagaries of fading parchment. This structured approach to preserving his life's work became paramount. Leonardo meticulously organized his volumes of notes, sketching out plans for how future generations might benefit from his investigations. He saw his legacy not just in the finished paintings that adorned churches and palaces, but in the very process of inquiry itself. The relentless questioning, the detailed observation, and the persistent search for underlying principles that governed the visible world. He knew that true understanding came not from isolated discoveries, but from seeing the threads that connected them all. The king, recognizing the importance of this endeavor, ensured that ample resources were available, providing scribes and assistants to aid in the monumental task of cataloging Leonardo's vast collection of manuscripts. This shared commitment between ruler and artist aimed to secure a future for the master's intellectual capital, ensuring that the curiosity that had driven him throughout his life would continue to inspire and inform others long after his passing. The quietude of Clos Lucé became a sanctuary for the distillation of a lifetime's genius, a place where the seeds of future understanding were carefully sown. In the quiet hum of Amboise, surrounded by the tangible results of his lifelong inquiry and the attentive care of a supportive king, the master painter found a profound sense of purpose. The notebooks, filled with a lifetime of observation and innovation, had woven themselves so completely into the fabric of his final days.
The air, once alive with the bustling sounds of a royal court, now settled into a quieter hum. Candlelight flickered in the chambers of Clos Lucé, casting long shadows that stretched and danced with the wind's gentle sigh outside. A young apprentice, his fingers still bearing the faint stains of charcoal and ink, watched the elder master. He remembered the awe he felt when first arriving in France, the king's enthusiastic welcome, a stark contrast to the shifting allegiances and uncertain futures he had witnessed before. Now, amidst the comforting familiarity of familiar tools and the scent of drying linseed oil, a profound stillness pervaded the master's workspace. He recalled the initial days of his arrival here, how King Francis had personally escorted him, expressing immense admiration for the collection of paintings and scientific instruments the master had brought. The king's interest extended beyond mere art. He was captivated by the intricate mechanisms, the detailed anatomical drawings, and the visionary designs for waterways and architecture that filled the master's many notebooks. It was a unique patronage, one that offered not just financial security, but also intellectual freedom, a rare commodity in a world often governed by rigid hierarchies and established dogmas. The master, though weary from years of travel and constant intellectual pursuit, seemed to find a renewed vigor in this final sanctuary. The apprentice, whose name was Francesco, often found himself contemplating the sheer volume of the master's work. His hands, once nimble enough to coax beauty from stone and paint, now moved with a more deliberate, if slower, rhythm as he continued to refine the subtle layers of the Mona Lisa, a painting he would carry with him until his last days. Francesco understood this personal connection. Many of the master's works were not merely commissions to be completed and delivered, but rather ongoing explorations, surfaces to which he would return again and again, adding new insights or refining existing details. He had seen him spend days perfecting the delicate curl of a lock of hair or the almost imperceptible curve of a lip. While the master diligently worked on his art, Francesco was tasked with a different, equally vital duty: the preservation of the master's vast intellectual legacy. This involved meticulously organizing the countless notebooks filled with mirrored script that only a trained eye could decipher. Each page was a window into a mind that never ceased questioning,
observing and theorizing. He saw sketches of human anatomy placed alongside designs for flying machines, observations of water currents juxtaposed with studies of light and shadow. The sheer breadth of inquiry was staggering, a testament to an insatiable curiosity that spanned the entirety of the natural and mechanical worlds. The king, who often visited, would sit for hours listening intently as the master spoke of his discoveries. He found particular fascination in the master's theories on hydraulics and his designs for canal systems, ideas that held immense practical value for the kingdom. The master, in turn, would sketch ideas for courtly spectacles, elaborate mechanical automata, and stage designs for theatrical performances, further weaving his artistic and engineering talents into the fabric of French court life. This exchange of ideas, a blend of royal interest and intellectual brilliance, created a unique environment where innovation felt not just welcomed, but actively encouraged. Francesco knew that the master's methods, particularly his anatomical investigations, had sometimes led him into conflict with societal norms and religious doctrines. He recalled hushed conversations among those who had assisted with dissections, the risks involved, and the need for secrecy. Yet the pursuit of understanding the intricate workings of the human body had been a driving force, a profound desire to peel back the layers of creation and comprehend its divine engineering. The master's detailed drawings, meticulously rendered, offered a new perspective, challenging the established, often incomplete understanding of human anatomy that prevailed for centuries. This persistent drive to understand extended to the natural world in its entirety. Francesco remembered witnessing the master meticulously studying the flight patterns of birds, filling pages with observations of wing structure, air currents, and the subtle movements that allowed for sustained flight. These studies were not abstract curiosities, but the foundation for a lifelong dream, the creation of machines that could mimic this aerial grace. The practical challenges were immense, requiring an understanding of materials, balance, and aerodynamics that was far ahead of its time. The many sketches of wings, gears, and rotors were a testament to years of persistent thought and repeated, often unsuccessful experimentation. As the years in France continued, Francesco found himself increasingly drawn into the master's vast network of knowledge. He was not the only one. Other apprentices and scholars, drawn by the master's reputation and the king's patronage, also worked and learned within the estate. They shared in the task of transcribing, illustrating, and discussing the master's findings, creating a small but dedicated community focused on absorbing and preserving his immense intellectual output. The spirit of collaboration, though centered around the master's singular genius, fostered a sense of shared purpose and intellectual camaraderie amongst them. One of the most persistent challenges Francesco faced was the master's tendency to leave projects unfinished. Not out of laziness, but from a relentless pursuit of an ever-shifting ideal perfection. He would begin a painting with immense fervor, only to set it aside when a new idea or a more compelling line of inquiry captured his attention. The Mona Lisa was perhaps the prime example, a work he continued to refine for years, adding subtle glazes and adjustments that transformed its very essence over time. This perfectionism, while frustrating for patrons who desired finished works, was also the source of his unparalleled artistic depth. The master himself often reflected on this aspect of his creative process, sharing his thoughts with Francesco during their quiet evenings. He spoke of the painter's struggle to capture the fleeting nature of human expression, the subtle interplay of light and shadow that defines form. He believed that true art was a continuous evolution, an ongoing conversation between the artist and the canvas, a process that rarely concluded definitively. This belief meant many of his most ambitious projects, like the colossal bronze horse intended to honor Francesco Sforza in Milan, remained incomplete, existing only as detailed plans and magnificent scale models. Francesco also observed the master's keen interest in the changing seasons and their impact on the landscape around Clos Lucé. He would spend hours sketching the intricate patterns of frost on leaves, or the way sunlight broke through the canopy of trees after a spring rain. These observations, seemingly simple, were deeply connected to his broader studies of nature's design and the principles that governed all living things. He saw how the master's attention to the smallest detail, whether in the vein of a leaf or the muscle of a horse, was part of a larger effort to understand the interconnectedness of the universe. It was a way of appreciating creation's underlying order. The master's scientific inquiries, however, were not always widely disseminated or understood during his lifetime. Many of his groundbreaking ideas, particularly those related to mechanics and anatomy, remained confined within his personal notebooks. The use of mirrored script, while a clever method for personal record-keeping, also served as a barrier to casual perusal, contributing to the sense that his scientific explorations were conducted in a private, almost secluded realm. This created a subtle tension for Francesco. He felt the immense value of these discoveries and worried about their potential obscurity once the master was gone.
He remembered a particular conversation with one of the master's earlier pupils, a man named Salai, who spoke of the master's relentless curiosity and his unique way of teaching. Salai described how the master encouraged experimentation, even failure, seeing each setback as a lesson learned. He explained how the master's studio was a place where questions were as valued as answers, and where the pursuit of knowledge was a communal endeavor, even as the master's own insights stood as the guiding force. This passed-down knowledge, this oral tradition of inquiry, was itself a crucial part of the master's enduring influence. The master's legacy, Francesco realized, was not solely tied to the finished paintings that adorned palace walls or the treatises that might one day be widely read. It was woven into the very fabric of how he approached the world, with an unyielding curiosity, a meticulous eye for detail, and a profound belief in the interconnectedness of art and science. He saw how his own understanding of painting, of anatomy, and of the natural world had been fundamentally reshaped by his time here. The master's notebooks, filled with a lifetime of observation and invention, were not just records. They were seeds, waiting for fertile ground to sprout anew in the minds of future generations. As Francesco carefully closed the heavy cover of a bound volume of anatomical drawings, the faint chirping of crickets outside provided its usual tranquil accompaniment. As the final strokes of inspiration fade from our minds, and the meticulous sketches of Leonardo da Vinci settle into the quiet of the night, let us drift towards peaceful slumber. We've journeyed through the remarkable life of a true Renaissance genius, witnessing his boundless curiosity and his masterful touch in art and science. Imagine him, perhaps, by the soft glow of candlelight, his mind alight with invention, shaping ideas that would echo through centuries. Let the spirit of his quiet diligence guide you into a restorative rest. May your dreams be as filled with wonder and creativity as his workshops were. Sleep soundly and awaken refreshed, carrying a piece of that enduring genius with you.